So I was trying to think this week of the biggest, wildest worship service I'd ever been to. We get that picture in the 4th chapter of Revelation of this worship going on in heaven. And I think, what's the wildest worship, like the biggest, loudest worship I've ever been to? And most of the largest worship gatherings I've been to are a bunch of United Methodist pastors. And these things are powerful. I mean, we go to annual conference every year, and it's half pastors and half lay people about. And in the evenings, there's some really big worship services, 1,500, 2,000 people gathered in a sanctuary, new pastors being ordained. You're celebrating the lives of people who have served the church for years. And we've had some great preachers. Our bishop is fantastic, and we've brought in some people the last few years. So those are powerful nights. But we are Methodists, after all. So they're not the biggest or the wildest I've been to. I went to a concert at the Church of the Resurrection, the largest United Methodist church in the country. And it was pastors, but it was also a bunch of staff from churches. So we had the youth staff and the music staff that really kind of pump it up the energy a little bit. And there was a bigger room, so that was a lot of fun. But the one that takes the cake, I think, was when I was 14 years old and I went to a DC Talk concert at Six Flags over Texas. They kind of set up this whole thing where they bring in Christian bands for a whole weekend, and they try to get youth groups from all over Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana and New Mexico to come in for the whole weekend and spend money. And it works. We came and we spent a lot of money. And they have the bands play. But the thing is, a week before this concert, DC Talk had a crossover hit. Their song Jesus Freak was getting played on the radio. And not just the Jesus channels, the real radio. And so we were all pretty excited that we were getting to see the biggest Christian rock band in the country. And so we get there, and DC Talk, actually, they don't play any instruments, or at least they didn't back then, but they were being backed up by a phenomenal band. They toured under the name Zilch for years, and I don't know if they're still together. But they're amazing, and they had speakers all the way to the ceiling. It was a big outdoor amphitheater. I bet it only seats around 1,000 people. I'm trying to remember it in my head, but still, there was so much energy in that room. There was all the energy of, like, just teenagers packed into a place together. There's the energy of, like I remember it. I don't know who the warm-up band was because my hand brushed against Laura's, and she didn't take it away, and that's all I remember from the warm-up band. So there's like that kind of energy going on, and there's the excitement of seeing like the big band and the popular thing, and they get to the end, they're talented guys, so they build the concert in such a way that it's getting more and more energetic, and it gets to the point you're like, all right, Jesus Freak is going to be the next song, and they start it, and the place goes nuts. And they're singing, and we're all singing along because we all know the words, even the rap part, which I will never, ever do, but I bet I could still hit. No, I'm not going to do it. We are going nuts, but it's just a concert at this point. And they build the end of that song, and it kind of rings out on this chord. And they've gone back through. They've done the chorus like 9 times, so we all sing along with it. And it builds and it builds, and it rings out, but it's not dying off. And the drums change their beat a little bit, and the bass player starts doing something different. And all 3 of the guys that start singing in harmony an old campfire song called I Love You, Lord. This was like the first mega hit in praise and worship music. Back in the 60s when people first started bringing guitars into churches and freaking people out. This song, I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice. They start singing this song, and every one of us in that room knew that song. Because back in our home churches, we'd all had some guy who learned it back in the 60s, stand up with his nylon string guitar and sing it on Sunday morning thinking the youth would really love it. In my church, that was my dad. But in that moment, to see them reclaim this movement of a new kind of music, a new cultural language being spoken in the church, and to sing it with that band behind them, we all start singing along. And then they move into another worship song. And I don't remember what these songs were. They were whatever was popular at the time. And we do 3 or 4 worship songs together, and all of a sudden it's not a concert. We are in a worship service, and everybody's still going nuts. But all that energy that had come from so many different directions, they've managed to focus towards God in a way that was really powerful. I remember Kevin, one of the guys, taking the microphone, and at one point we're all shouting and yelling between songs. He's like, I want us to yell, I love Jesus so loud they can hear it in Houston. I don't know where he said, because we were all yelling, I love Jesus already. So he said, hear it in, and we were already yelling. And we did, and there was so much power in that room. Like there is an energy in getting people together, standing in front of God and saying, you're good, and we need your help. I talked about this sometime last summer. That's the posture of worship. That's what we say every week when we gather. You're good, and I need your help. And I know that you've been in moments in this room where it's the same thing. We are all in the same place together, and there's an energy in saying that together that changes the way we see God, the way we see each other, and the way we see the world. And that's what this chapter of Revelation is about. It's about worship. Of course, it's very weird because there's things with eyes all over them, and there's like random people, and there's seas of glass, and there's all kinds of weird stuff going on. But again, if you, just like the reading we had last week, if you know the languages that the people then knew, it makes a little bit more sense. The first people that are introduced are the 24 elders around the throne. And if you know the Old Testament, the people who spoke Hebrew, that knew the stories, 12 is always a significant number. Hebrew numerology is really important in this book. And 12 and multiples of 12 always point back to the 12 tribes of Israel. The people of God, who God chose to be the messengers in the presence of God on earth. And so 12 always means the 12 tribes of Israel. Are we okay? Okay, I did the same thing. The other 12 is kind of a question, but I think the most convincing argument is the other 12 around the throne represent the 12 apostles, the people of the Old Covenant and the people of the New Covenant surrounding the throne of God, giving their worship. And that's what we know when we speak the language of the Old Testament. And then you start to think about the language of the apocalypse, of all these other people that were writing the same kind of literature. And when they bring in animals, animals always mean something. Now, they might represent a person, but you pick that animal because of the attribute of that animal that's sort of alive in the day. You know, like we think of, like if I say elephant or whale, you think big automatically. And so there are animals like that. I think pig, and you either think what they eat or how they smell, something like that. Like there are animals that when we say something, there's words attached to it. And that's how these animals were. So it says that one of these animals was like a lion. And so the first thing in everybody's head was nobility. And so this is it's like a lion, but it's covered in eyes. You're not supposed to picture this literally. This image right down here pictures this scene literally, and it's just weird. You're supposed to just realize that these animals can see everything. They also have 6 wings, which means anywhere they want to be, they could be. They can get anywhere in all creation. They've seen everything, and what they choose to do is stand and worship God. So you've got the nobility of all creation at the foot of the throne. Next, it talks about the ox, and the ox was strong. There are animals that were probably stronger, like elephants and whales, but you can't really put a harness on them. So ox was thought of as strength because it was strength that humans could use. So an ox is strong, so that the strength of all creation that could be anywhere in creation is at the foot of the throne, offering God worship. Humans, you say humanity, you say man, and in their brain they know that men are the wisest characters. There's quite a bit of evidence to the contrary. I agree with that. But that was what was in their head. That's what if they say human beings, you say they're the wisest of all creation. So, humanity, but a version of humanity that can see all, could be anywhere it wants to be, is at the foot of the throne, offering God worship. And then an eagle was the swiftest, the fastest, right there. So you've got all the elders, the people of the covenant surrounding the throne. And then the ones who are right at the foot, you've got the perfection of all creation. Like creation par excellence, surrounding the throne, saying, God, you are worthy to receive glory and honor and power and praise. You are holy. That's what you see when you speak these languages. But if you know the language of the current events of the day, you start to see something else unfolding. Because starting in this picture, and going throughout the entire rest of the book of Revelation, John, our author, is being offered a contrast between the throne of God and the thrones of the kings that he knew in the world. The first, most obvious difference between God's throne room and the throne of the other is the size. It says there's a sea of glass as clear as crystal. So this is happening on a giant scale. So John's probably standing way back watching all this at some kind of distance, and he feels like what's between him and the throne is as clear and as big as the ocean, but solid. And that's as close as he can get to describing, as a sea of glass as clear as crystal. And then he starts to describe God, and you can't even describe God. He says he looks like jasper and ruby, and that other stone is not really ruby. There is a Greek word for ruby, and that's not what he used. It's a different word. In most movies now, when somebody holds up a ruby, what they're actually holding is one of these. And I forget the name. I should have looked it up. But it's a red stone, and the way the crystals form in it, it points all light towards the center. And it means that it looks like there's always like a point of light, a point of fire in the center of the stone. And so he says that God is shining both white and flaming red at the same time. That doesn't even make sense, but that's as close as he can get to describing what he sees. And then he sees that God is surrounded by a rainbow that's the color emerald, which means it's not really a rainbow, but he doesn't know what else to call it. There's some kind of supernatural circle going around God that reminds him of the peace, the covenant, the promise God made to be faithful and to protect creation. Way back, the story of Noah when he put the rainbow in the sky. You see the contrast between God's throne and the thrones of the kings of the world being that God is the one with all the power. God is the source of all power and energy. God is not a human. God is holy. God is bigger than everything else. And every king on earth is just trying to be powerful. And next to God, they look silly. But the biggest contrast between this king and the king we find sitting on all the other thrones comes in chapter 5. I'm going to read a little bit of chapter 5. And before I do, the one thing I'm going to explain from it is that a scroll means God's will. So it says that the one sitting on the throne has a scroll in his hand of jasper and ruby, flaming, all that stuff. But it says he has a scroll. That means that's God's will, and they want to see this scroll open so God's will can be done. And the tension in the story is they can't find anyone to open it. But the way the story is told gives us new layers. So let me read this for you. This is starting in verse 1 of chapter 5. Then I saw on the right hand of him who sits on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the 7 seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing in the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, sent out into all the earth. He came to took the scroll from the hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp. Yes, each one had a harp they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints, and they sang a new song. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain in your blood. With your blood you purchased humans for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom of priests to serve our God, and they will reign over the earth. So they find someone to open the scroll. And we know the Lamb of God is going to be Jesus. We understand what's going on here. But they open the scroll with sort of a cosmic bait and switch. Because what's introduced is the lion. We need someone strong enough to open the scroll. And the guy says, "Don't worry, John. There's a solution. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is coming out." And what comes out is a lamb that looks like it's already been slaughtered. The people who are reading this book were used to Caesar. And if they'd never even seen Caesar, because he'd never thought their corner of the world was worth showing up in, they'd seen the people that wanted to be Caesar. They'd seen Herod, who wanted to be Caesar's right-hand man. They'd seen Caesar's military leaders who wanted to look just like him. They'd seen men who show up and show their power with swords, with crowns, with armies. God doesn't work like that. God's power is alive most clearly in human weakness. That's what happens on the cross. That's why the lamb shows up instead of the lion to open the seven seals on the scroll. Because when we use human power to solve the world's problems, we way too often use it in the wrong way. It causes more problems than it solves way too often. And God knows that our only hope is power used in a different way. So God's power shows up in human weakness. There's a part in the Left Behind books, which I'll try not to insult too often, but I really think they missed the mark on this Revelation thing. But there's a whole series within the books where they've developed an army. The Christians, the Left Behind Christians, have built the Tribulation Force, and they've got an underground bunker, and they've collected weapons, and they're going out and they're killing off the forces of the Antichrist. And they seem to have missed the point that it's not the lion who solves the problems, it's the lamb. Human power cannot save us. That's why God chose to show up in the way that God did. That's why God chose to reject human power altogether in saving the world. God arrived in the world as an infant. God spoke the truth in ways that got him in trouble. And God, when he was arrested and put on a cross, died with forgiveness on his lips. Because human power can't save us. God's power, God's use of what we would call weakness is what makes the change. And God's power is going to show up a lot through the rest of this book. You're going to see mountains moved and things crumbled, and you're going to see lightning crashing, and you're going to see God's power really alive throughout the rest of Revelation. But before John shares those visions with us, he needs to let us know that it's not the lion. We worship the Lamb. He needs us thinking about a different kind of force, a different kind of power alive in the world, and one that can truly change. How this plays out is going to be a little bit different as we move forward, but God's power saves us through human weakness, and that's the truth. Think about the people who read this first. Some of them had a lot of problems with human power. They were being oppressed by the people around them. Whoever was in control of their community was treating them poorly because they were Christians. The human power in the world around them was all directed against them, and they needed to hear this promise that your weakness is a source of power for God. What the world thinks is weak is where God's going to start saving your world, your corner of the kingdom. And for all those people who weren't doing so well, last week we read about the people in Laodicea who had gathered enough wealth that they felt like they didn't need anything. God said, that's human power, and that's not the way I work. They needed to hear the message of hope for the ones that were in trouble and the message of warning for the ones who thought they were doing just fine but were missing the mark. But what does this have to do with us? I don't live in Laodicea, and I don't live in Smyrna or any of the other 7 churches that he writes this letter to, but these 2 chapters, 4 and 5, should change the way we think about our lives. Because they remind us, first and foremost, that worship is important, that worship is a thing worth doing. There are people who have copied this model and have, for the last almost 20 years, I think it started in 1996, so for almost 20 years, there have been a few places around the world where people have been worshiping for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is what they do with their time. And it's not the same person. Obviously they split it up, they take shifts. But it started in London, and I know there's some in Australia. There's several throughout the United States. There's a big group of people that do this in Kansas City called the International House of Prayer. Yes, they call themselves IHOP. And I've had friends who've done internships there, and they teach you a lot about music, and they teach about preaching and teaching. And so they've gone and done internships there and then gone into ministry in different ways. And part of your internship, part of the gig is you fill in those spots in the middle of the night. And sometimes at 3 or 4 in the morning, you're the only one in there. But someone is worshiping God in that space. And this is the way that they respond to the call that God is worthy to receive glory and honor and power and praise. That it's worth our time to say, God, you're good and I need your help. But most of us ain't got time for 24/7. So it means something different for most of us. It means that what we need to do is start building an attitude of worship into the rest of our lives. And there are several ways that we can do that. One of them is to attend worship regularly. Like we are here doing that right now today. We're building an attitude of worship into who we are by taking a regular time out of our week, coming together and standing with other people and saying, God, you're good and I need your help. But there's other things that we can do throughout the week too. One of them that works for me, and you'll hear me talk about gratitude a lot, it's to get better at saying thank you. Not just to God, but to everyone who's done something kind for you. Getting good at saying thank you makes you better at worshiping God because it brings your mind back to God more often. It changes the way you look at the world if you're looking at things that you're happy about instead of things that upset you, because there are plenty of things to upset us. And so it changes our outlook the more often that we say thank you. So we attend worship regularly. That helps us build this attitude of worship. We say thank you more often, and then we pray. And I'd encourage you to pray out loud. And I don't mean like to lead prayer at dinner when there's a lot of people around. I just mean to say your prayers, put them out into the world. I do this, and I only do it when I'm alone. Because if I did it when I was standing on an elevator with people, they'd just think I was weird. But when I've got something, when I realize, oh, God, I need your help with such and such, I say it out loud. I say, God, I'm really glad that such and such has happened. God, that's a beautiful sunset. God, I'm not going to make it through the rest of the day without you. God, I need your patience because Margot has been up for an hour and a half and it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I got to preach in a couple of hours. I really said that out loud just a few hours ago. Like whatever it is, I say it out loud because when I say it out loud, it takes it out of my head. If I pray one of these things in my head, God hears it. But in my head, it's just one of the other thoughts. It says, God, thank you that I didn't just get in that accident back there when the guy nearly cut me off. But then the next thing is, I really hate this song. I'm changing the radio station. And I got to get this, and this done before I go pick up Margot at 4 o'clock. And it just stays in my head. But when I say it out loud, I've used not just my mind, but I've used my body to give God thanks. And it starts to change our attitude as we do that. So I'd encourage you to show up to church. It's a very self-serving thing for me to say, obviously. But it's good for us. It's why we do it. To say thank you more often and then to pray out loud when you can. But the thing is, this chapter is not just about worship, because the quote that's at the beginning of that video that we showed from Ralph Waldo Emerson, I don't know if you saw it, it says, what we worship, we are becoming. And that's the message of this too. It says that the elders who are sitting around the throne are holding bowls of incense, and they represent the prayers of the saints. It says that our worship, our prayer, our relationship to God holds physical space in some kind of way in God's kingdom. Like that those things matter. They have some kind of spiritual mass to them. That's what's being represented by that. And so when we lean into that, it's changing who we are and it's changing the world around us. Who we are worshiping, the one who sits on the throne, the one who doesn't use force the way that we do, but who saves the world in a way no one expected. As we worship God, we should be allowing God to make us more like Jesus. That night that we were all at Six Flags and we were shouting at the top of our lungs, Jesus, or I love Jesus, even if we had shouted it loud enough for everyone in Houston to hear us, I don't think it would have changed anyone's heart for Jesus. I think it would have just annoyed all the neighbors between Dallas and Houston. So I think there's something more to it. What if we had left that place and acted like Jesus? Maybe that would have changed someone's heart. What if we gather here every Sunday and as we left, we were prepared to respond to the world with kindness instead of bitterness? A little bit more. Kindness can be dangerous. I mean, it's usually not physically dangerous. If it is, maybe it's not the time. Maybe it's just the time to go somewhere else. But most of the time, it can be socially dangerous. It can be professionally dangerous for us to show kindness to somebody who's mistreating us. But what we're doing is we're choosing human weakness for the sake of being like Jesus. And that has the power to change lives. What if we gathered here every Sunday morning and with the intention of worshiping so that as we left, we were better at showing people compassion? Compassion hurts. Real compassion is not just what you do for somebody else, but it's being present with them in their hurt. It's feeling what they feel so that you know what they might need. Compassion is sitting with someone who's lost someone and not trying to get them to get past their grief, but just being present with them. Compassion is being with someone who's poor in a way that leads you to give up some of your own stuff. Compassion is loving somebody who needs love even when it takes everything you've got. And compassion is what God has shown each one of us. When we hurt, when we're lost, when we need love, God shows up. God teaches the truth. God dies with forgiveness on his lips to show us compassion. And God gives us the strength to be like that, to live like that through the time that we spend in worship. So what if we gathered in this room each week and we left here ready to forgive? To offer people forgiveness even before they ask it, because that is giving up human power. If someone has wronged you, if somebody's done something that you need to forgive them for, you own the power of righteous indignation. That's your right. But using that power to bludgeon someone else does not lead us into the kingdom of God. And it's nothing we can do on our own, but if we ask for God's help, if we begin to build this attitude of worship and let God's grace work in us, we can let go of that power. We can choose God's way instead of our way, and we can see lives changed through kindness and compassion and forgiveness. We can give up on these human ideas of what power looks like and how we can force our way into doing the right thing, and we can start to be about a God who is at work the poorest people around us, with the people who are hurting the most, with the people who are the most lost. Because when you dig into those places, you are going to find the one who sits on the throne alive and at work. That God is worthy of glory and honor and power and praise. That God is holy.